Hello, in this video, I'm going to realize a figured bass in a part writing example that includes non-harmonic tones. This example is taken from Connie Mayfield's Theory Essentials theory textbook, Chapter 16 workbook. The first step is to realize or fill in the notes represented by the figured bass numbers. I'll use the second chord, which has a 7 and a 6 in a row under the bass. So I simply think what note is a 7th above the bass and what note is a 6th above the bass. A 7th above would be B flat. The tenor is a good candidate for the B flat since the tenor is already singing a B flat. Since the notes are in the same row under the same bass note, the same voice gets both of those notes. So the 6th above will also go in the tenor. There's our 7th. And there's our 6th. Step 2 is to determine the triad position implied by the least dissonant figured bass number, whether it's root position, first inversion, or second inversion. You can consult our shorthand chart if needed. So if we look at our shorthand chart, we see if we see the number 6 alone, that it implies first inversion. So we will ignore the 7 and use the 6 to decide what chord this is and what additional pitches need to be added. I see a C in the bass. That must be the third of the chord, so the chord must be A, C, E flat. And I already have a C, and I already have an A, which is here. So the missing pitch is E flat, which would go in the alto. Finally, the third step, I will check to make sure that I'm following the guidance given on doubling. For first inversion, we're guided to double the soprano when possible, and the soprano is already doubled in the bass. Finally, I'll add the lead sheet symbol and the Roman numeral. Again, using the most consonant or least dissonant note to determine the chord, I will ignore the 7th above and use the 6th above. So this is the note I'm ignoring. I'll put it in blue. So that looks like an A diminished chord over C. Then its Roman numeral would be 7 diminished. And we'll include the 6, which implies first inversion. I'll do one more spot on this example. At the end, we see a row of numbers 4, 3, 2, 3. And I'll go through the same process. Number 1, realize or fill in the notes represented by the figured bass. So a 4th above B flat is E flat. So this number is going to equal E flat. This number is going to equal D. The 2 is going to equal C. And the 3 again will equal D. So since the alto is already singing in E flat, that's voice is a good candidate for this row of 4 notes. Then I go to step 2, determine the triad position implied by the least dissonant figured bass number. The least dissonant number in this case is the 3. 4 and 2 are more dissonant. If I look at my figured bass chart, I notice that the figured bass that has a 3 in it is in root position. That is invisible in this case. I don't see a 6 anywhere, so there's no implication of inversion. So I look at the notes that I have, including the 3 and ignoring the 4 and the 2. So I'll ignore those notes. and I see I have a B flat, and a D. Since I'm in root position, the only thing missing is the fifth, the F. So I include that. Then again, ignoring the 4 and the 2, I determine that this chord is a B flat major, and it would get Roman numeral 1.